When we think about the war in Iran in 2026, we think about um, it's a war of choice. Um, the Trump administration said that there was uh, a, an eventual threat, not an imminent threat, and it was a war about regime change, at least in the beginning. So that was one of the rationales. And when we look in history, we can look for situations where we could teach students about these issues about wars of choice and uh, about regime change. And one of the examples that might come up is the Bay of Pigs. It's certainly not similar to the war in Iran in many ways, but it is a war of choice, and it is a war that allegedly started as regime change. Certainly did in the case of the Bay of Pigs. So when we teach about that, the in 1961, the U.S. was very upset that a communist had taken over only 90 miles away from uh, the mainland U.S. And we were trying to overthrow that government. The CIA came up with a plan, and that plan turned out to be the Bay of Pigs. So, one way to do this is to give students the historical context and the CIA plan that they cooked up and have them, as President Kennedy, decide what they're going to do. Are they going to support the plan? Are they going to use U.S. forces actively, or are they going to have the Cubans invade with only minimal support by the U.S. to keep the U.S. out of the getting blamed for what happens? Or are they going to cancel it? And so those are some options, and students can learn a lot about that historical event by playing through this simulation. But also they learn about decision making, and in this case, if they go ahead with the invasion, it's a bad outcome, and people can learn a lot more from negative, bad choices than from good choices. So it teaches us humility, and it's helpful that way. The uh, this simulation is on Critical Thinking website, and you can find it at criticalthinking, all one word.com. So in this situation, the students get this information, and they have to make up their mind. And the way I tend to do it is have the students write something individually and then pair up and talk to another classmate and then decide what they're going to do. But this one involves it involves many, many skills. But two of them are asking questions and anticipating unintended consequences. So, in terms of asking questions, you can just say to students, okay, so you've decided one way or another. Before we move on and discuss it further, and then you can re-vote on whether to support the invasion all out, or secondly, support it but with minimal U.S. help, active help on the battlefield, or three, cancel it. Before we go back and decide that again, what questions do you have? My experience as a teacher is you're not going to get it very much. Some of the students may say, "Is this going to be on the next test, or can I go to the bathroom?" Um, they can have somewhat better questions than that, but it's a difficult thing, not just for students but also for adults. So, how do we teach that? How do we get them to improve at the skill of asking good questions? Well, one way to do that is to give students a menu of questions. So I've got one of the handouts is 9 questions, and students get to pick any 3 of those questions. And after they pick them, we vote, okay, how many voted for number 1? And the top 3 vote getters end up getting answers, suggested answers, in a different handout that the teacher would read to them, and then they go back and discuss it. But afterwards, you could have a discussion about which question was most helpful, or which of the questions didn't get answered would you have hoped to have answered. That's a way of getting students to learn how to ask questions that are really helpful. You need to have a discussion about which questions were helpful in this case. That's a way of teaching students that skill. So 2 of the questions are, what do intelligence reports from various U.S. agencies show about the strength of the opposition to Castro? Notice the way the question is framed. It's not what's the strength of the opposition. It's what do intelligence reports say about it. That's a very important distinction. In the previous question was asking just the CIA, how strong is the opposition? My hunch is that students would not pick the one just asking the CIA. They'd ask of all the advisors and focus it on what do intelligence reports show. If there aren't intelligence reports, then we're just guessing. And that's an important distinction to make. Another one is, hang on here, is there evidence that the invasion preparation has been kept secret? Now, it turns out in the Bay of Pigs, it wasn't secret at all. There were all kinds of reports. So the answer to this question is pretty obvious. It's not a secret. And the premise of the invasion is that the Cubans will be surprised, the Cuban army will be surprised, and before they know it, they've got an insurrection on their hands. That's fantasy land. It didn't exist. I mean, there were reports in the New York Times, the Russian government, the Atlantic. There were articles in the press saying, that there was this invasion coming. At one point, President Kennedy said, well, Castro doesn't even need agents to know the invasion's coming. He can read it in our newspapers, which is amazing because then he went ahead with the invasion. So this is an important element in making decisions. And then the second thing is skill is anticipating unintended consequences. Now, you can say to students, now think about unintended consequences, and that isn't going to get you very far. So the strategy here is what's called a pre-mortem. That is, after an event, after a sports event, if you were on a basketball team and you lost a game, you would do a post-mortem. Like, okay, how come we lost? Oh, well, they were better at their press and we didn't break it. So this is what we're going to do next time. Post-mortems are helpful if you can do the thing again. They're not very helpful if you have a bad invasion. So what if you didn't do it as a post-mortem, but as a pre-mortem? That is, you said, okay, so you've decided, whatever you've decided, whether to go with the invasion or not go with the invasion, it's 2 years later, and it didn't work out at all. It was a disaster. What happened? Describe how it went wrong. And that then discussion, that strategy is helpful in students anticipating unintended consequences. When you invade, you don't mean that, some awful thing like nuclear war is going to happen. So this is a way of getting students to think about those unintended consequences. And it's been pretty successful in my classes. Students really start thinking about, well, wait a minute, if we do that, what could go wrong? A lot of people call this having a plan B or an exit strategy. It's important to get students to internalize that they need to think about what could go wrong. That's really important. Okay, so there were other elements in this. This is the Bay of Pigs is famously analyzed according to something called groupthink. And that was actually a book, and one of the chapters called Groupthink, and one of the chapters was on the Bay of Pigs. After the disaster, I think every person that was involved said, well, actually, I was opposed to it. So here's a question: if you were opposed to it, how did it go? Go forward. At one point, President Kennedy had the people in the decision-making room vote for or against the invasion, and everybody but one voted for it. They voted reluctantly for it. They said they had reservations, but yes, sir, if we're going to do it. And that yes, sir, is really, really important to think about in terms of groupthink. I will suppress my criticisms, my reservations, because I want to be a team player. So that's an important element. If you get to be president or any other thing, make sure you have people who disagree with you, who are likely to disagree with what you're deciding to do, and hear them out. It's really important. Not just, well, I've got this reservation, but overall I support, but this is stupid. Let's not do this. So that's an important element in it. And another thing that I've noticed is sort of the time limit. So in the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban army was going to get MiG aircraft in another month or two or three, a few months, and 100 trained pilots. And once they had that, the analysts said, you're not going to be able to invade. Militarily, it's not going to work. So there was a time limit. There was also a time limit because the rainy season was coming up and you have to wait months after that. Meanwhile, they get the planes and then you won't be able to invade. Watch out when you have a time limit. This is also a factor in World War One. The Germans believed that the Russians were building a railroad, and once they built that railroad, their larger army would be able to be moved around very quickly, and the Germans would lose their advantage. So while they had the advantage, they needed to attack the Russians eventually. It's more complicated than that, but essentially that was a factor in Germans taking a strong stand in 1914. It may have been a factor certainly seems like it, in the Iran war in 2026, where, well, if we don't do anything, eventually the Iranians are going to get that atomic bomb, and then we're not going to be able to do anything. And my advice is when there's a clock ticking and you better do it now, watch out. That's when a lot of bad decisions get made. Certainly in World War One, definitely in the Bay of Pigs, and who knows, possibly in the Iran war in 2026. So, what are the takeaways from the Bay of Pigs? And that can be a discussion you have with students. Like, what do you think is the important lessons that we should learn here? And I think it's worthwhile to do that, and they can apply it wherever they want. If they bring up other cases, then you can bring up other cases and analyze it that way. The important thing is that students are thinking about these kinds of issues, and they're thinking about them with certain skills, like asking questions, or anticipating unintended consequences, because they're doing it in a problem and not you pontificating about how this should be done. Okay, thank you very much.